there! In this video, I'm going to share the top 7 mistakes that people make when they're painting trees. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to show you an example of what people typically do wrong, and then we're going to talk about how to fix it. When people paint a tree, they generally go something like this. They paint the trunk, and then they paint the branches branching off of the trunk. Now, there are a few problems with this image right here. You can see that it kind of looks like a tree, but also not really. And we're going for that super realistic look. So let's talk about the first mistake that people make. Branches that are too smooth. Now, what do I mean with that? Basically, there's 2 ways in which the branches can be too smooth. Firstly, these branches really don't have a lot of bumps or textures or anything here. They just follow the smooth curve going up. The second way is we're talking about texture. Now, some trees have a little bit less texture and some have a little bit more texture on the bark, but usually it's not just one color. Usually it's not very blended. We need a few different colors to create that textured effect. So let me show you how to do that. We're going to start off with the base color, and we're going to make sure that this branch isn't completely smooth in the way that it grows. So instead of just drawing one smooth line, we're just going to add a little bit of texture. You can see I added a bump there and make it go a little bit in different directions so that it's looking a little bit more natural. You can see that the path of this branch is much more natural than the path of those branches. We're just working with one single branch right here so that I can show you what I mean. But in the end, you'll be applying these techniques to all the branches. Okay, so there's our branch. You can see there's some bumps, some ridges, and it's not completely straight. Now we want to mix a lighter brown. Here's my palette. You can see the burnt umber, you can see the white, and we'll add a little bit of yellow. And let's see if we can make a nicer, lighter brown. We might need to add a bit of red as well if it doesn't look right. So if you're mixing a color and it doesn't look right, you can try adding a bit of red. But I actually think this looks pretty good. So we're going to use this color, and then instead of painting everything up here, the lighter color, we're going to take this and just add drips and drabs of it. So obviously this is the lighter side of the branch, but the light will catch ridges of bark. It won't lighten everything. And then we also want to add a darker color in the shadowy areas. So we're taking that exact same burnt umber that we had. If we add a little bit of blue to it, it should be darker. And then again, if it doesn't work out well, you can add a bit of red to see if that works for you. And then we do the exact same thing on the bottom. So not even blending, just dabbing some color and making sure that it has a little bit of texture to it. Now you can continue with this process with different types of brown, and it will create a beautiful bark effect, but there's nothing new to it really than mixing different colors brown right now. So we're going to stop here, but I am very sure that you are getting the idea. Mistake number 2, branches that are not crossing one another. When we look at a tree, we are looking at a 3D object. And when you look at a 3D object, there's always something coming towards you and something going away. And that's the same with branches. Some branches should be coming towards you and some branches should be going away. In addition to that, branches are very erratic. So sometimes a branch might come towards you and then turn off to the side. And in the 2D picture that we are painting, that branch is crossing over the one that's behind it. And that's what we're missing in this picture. So let me show you how I fix this. You can start out with your base colors. So let's say we have the tree kind of there, and then the first branch comes up Remember, it should be a little bit textured, a little bit bumpy. And then the second branch decides to turn to the left, and it also splits here. And then we make this one go to the top, but then it has something branching off of it, going to the side, something going to this side. We can also make this one split up to this side. We can all agree that this picture right here looks a lot more like an actual tree than this picture right here. So always try to think, where wouldn't the branch go next when you're drawing it, and then making it go in that direction. We often see branches that go parallel to one another, that cross one another and then come back to cross one another again, or branches that are just completely on their own mission somewhere, not crossing anything but themselves. Now it's time to look at the third mistake. It's people drawing trees and then not having those small little branches branching off of the main branches. And you can see it on this picture right here as well. We don't have that small network of tiny, erratic little twigs branching off from this branch. It just kind of narrows and then stops. So to make your tree look more realistic, we need to add those tiny branches in. You can add these in before you paint in the leaves, but I also like to go back to these when I'm already finished with painting the leaves and then adding them in. So I think you pretty much got the idea when I explained to you, but let's just go over it again. So we have the branch, right? And then we have it branching off. But instead of narrowing it down, we want to make it branch off into multiple smaller branches. So I'm taking a small round brush for this and just some of that burnt umber that we've been working with. And now I'm going to split it up and just make erratic little lines going everywhere. It can even turn back. And they also get smaller and smaller the more they branch off. I just quickly want to interject this video by sharing with you that I made 2 cheat sheets and a PDF that goes into detail on these mistakes and into more mistakes because I can't cover all of them in this video. I'm going to put the link in the description below and most probably in the comment section as well. So if you want these resources, you can get them there. Remember, they are completely free and they are to help you paint better trees. Alright, let's go on. Mistake number 4, branches that narrow down or that look pinched. So oftentimes I see people take branches and then kind of pinch them to end them off. So you can see the branch is wide here and then it gets narrower the further it goes. And I think that's because people don't know how to end the branches, and they need to end it obviously because the tree can't go on forever. And it happens in large branches. In this branch you can see it going a little bit narrower, and this one, as well as the smaller branches branching off of the main branches. The reason why this is a problem is because that is not how trees behave. Trees usually have a certain diameter for their branches, and then when it branches off, the diameter gets smaller. So we never really see a narrowing in the branches themselves. We just see them branching off, and then there's smaller branches, and then they branch again, and those branches are smaller, and then they branch again, and those branches are smaller until they end in twigs that bear leaves. So let me show you how I fix this mistake. Instead of making the branches taper down in width, you keep them the same width to start out with, and then they branch off and they get thinner, and they branch off and get thinner. Obviously, you still want to remember to keep things erratic when you're painting this, but this is just for me to show you what happens to these branches. When you draw them, they'll go in all different directions while getting thinner when they branch off. And they also don't have to branch into 2 every time. You can add another branch here, or for example there, except it wouldn't be that wide. Now I made a mistake. Oftentimes you do see branches that look like this. Have a branch coming off, have a branch coming off, have a branch coming off, something like that. Now that we're done with the branches, I want to go on to the leaves. Mistake number 5 is painting the leaves with paint. I watered this down a lot now, but with paint that isn't opaque enough. So this is one of my pet peeves. If you have watched any of my videos, you know I love to keep my paint opaque. I don't like it if anything shows through. So you can see with these leaves that the branches are visible through the leaves. And obviously we want to fix that. Let's paint some branches for us to paint over. Now this is just a rough example. These branches look terrible, by the way. And I'm breaking like all of the rules now. This is just a mess, but it's okay. It will serve our purpose. Okay, so you might be tempted to just mix your green and paint your leaves in. And this works fine, except that when the paint dries, you can still oftentimes see the branches underneath, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. But if this doesn't bother you, you can go ahead doing this actually. But what I like to do is take my blue and my yellow, mix it, add a tiny bit of white. You can see it gets a little bit desaturated and a bit lighter when we do this. So just take note of that. Mix a little bit of white, titanium white, mind you, not lead white. Titanium white tends to be very opaque, especially when you mix it in with colors. It works really well to make the color more opaque. So I take that and I paint it. You can see it already blocked out those small branches out. Block them out. And then if you want to go darker, when you already have this layer down, then you can mix your darker green and paint it in on top of this color. And you can see the small difference that it makes. This side is much more opaque than this side. On this side you can still see some branches through. Now obviously you'll be working with different colors and some greens are more opaque than others. So you'll need to decide how you're going to approach this, but just make sure that your leaves are not showing through. Let's move on to this next mistake. Painting leaves that are too large and don't overlap. I'm using my filbert brush for this one because it's nice for painting large round shapes. Then people go ahead and they do this. The leaves don't overlap and they're massive. When you're far enough away, you won't see each individual leaf. So it doesn't make sense to paint it in all individually, and it doesn't make sense to have them not overlap one another. To fix that, here we have our tree. Now we need to do two things, right? We need to paint the leaves smaller and we need to make sure that they overlap. What I like to do, and I talked about this in my how to paint trees videos as well, I like to work with leaf clusters. So a cluster of leaves I kind of handle as one object with a shadowy side, highlights, and yeah, just handling it like that. So we can use the filbert for this as well. And let me show you how. We mix some green to start off with. This is just a normal mid-tone green, not really dark, not really light. And then we dab it on to create those nice pieces of texture. So you can see this is a leaf cluster. Then we'll go ahead and add another leaf cluster over here, and then a smaller one that kind of connects the two. Now we use those clusters to show us where the shadows need to be. I'm just adding a little bit of blue to my green to make it darker, and then we add the shadowy part in to this leaf cluster, and then to the smaller cluster, and then to the top cluster, and then we have to go ahead and add in the highlights. So I'm just adding a bit of white to my green, but more yellow to make it lighter. And I like using the texture of the brush to create the idea of there being smaller leaves. So let me bring you closer. So you can see these small areas of texture that the side of the brush creates. Those would be the individual leaves. And I like to just create a hint of these on the edges of my tree so that it looks like there's a lot more detail than there actually is. Are you ready for the last mistake? Because I am. The last mistake that we have is when we look at this tree here, there are no leaves here in the center. Now, when you're looking at the tree, there are leaves all around, right? So if you were standing right here to the side and looking at the tree, there would be leaves in front of you. Now, it doesn't mean that we need to obscure all of the branches that are here. But just like I like to work in leaf clusters, I also like to add a little cluster somewhere here in the middle that obscures some of the branches. So let me show you how I do that. So first off, we need a tree. We have a tree. Let's use a different brush. Okay, I'm gonna use this round one. We have a leaf cluster here. This one creates lovely texture. We have a leaf cluster there. Let's make this one kidney bean shaped. All these leaf clusters, by the way, should also be different shapes. They can have a trend, like most of them being roundish, but they should still look different and also different sizes. So now we have leaves going all around the tree. Now we need to add something in the middle as well. So I'm gonna put some leaves right here. And that's exactly what I mean. Now we can go ahead and mix a darker color to add some shadows under our leaf clusters. This is now very, very rough. And then mix some more yellow into that green and some white for the highlights. Now we add some highlights here. Now that you know the most common mistakes that people make when painting trees, I want you to watch this video next, in which I describe my process for painting beautiful trees.